Welcome to syn101, class 3. This is John Montgomery, serving as always as the voice of Victor Wolanski. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm enjoying the course and enjoying learning synthesize myself. This week we're going to take a look at some new helicopter footage that's going out with the course. There's a little bit of grain in it. It's a little noisy, but it's not going to be a problem. It's not going to cause us big issues when we're trying to track this. But there are going to be some other problems that we're going to have to work around, which is good. Because, that's a lot of what we do when we're doing 3D tracking, is solving problems and taking it to that next level and getting it accurate. And speaking of getting it accurate, we're going to make sure that we spend a little extra time this week of setting up the orientation correctly, as well as adding some extra objects in the scene and testing how good the track is. So here's our pretty much default settings that we've been doing in the past. We've got the frame rate set to 24. Over here, you've got a box where we're going to leave no resampling on. If you want to size a different size or track a lower res version, you have various processing filtering types. You can make it smaller. But as you've seen in the past, it's going to work fine for 1920 by 1080. And so we're going to go ahead and leave it set in at that. And again, very quick to load. Now, you can always hit auto as your first step, the big green button, if it's not clear enough for you. But you can also run the auto tracker and then do the solve after that if you want, because maybe you want to clean it up before you do the solve. But we're just going to go ahead and use the auto button. And so it's going to go through and first of all track the scene, and I don't know how many times we have to say how fast it is, but it's going to go through the tracking. And once that's done, it's going to go ahead and automatically switch over to doing the solve. And you can see some of the progress as it's doing so, working through the iterations of the optimization. You can see that the error, if you can see that in the UI, it's getting around 11 or so. Now it's down to 7 and so forth, trying a different version as well. And ends up with not such a great look, because as you can see from our track, it's just totally wrong. Couldn't be more wrong, in fact. Take a look at the side view. There's nothing correct about it. What's going on in the scene, if we look at it, Synthesize is fairly sensitive to having bad trackers in the scene. So it can really easily and quickly throw them off. So what we're going to do is, if you see some of these trackers here that are moving, you can see those on the car. It's actually tracking moving object in the scene. These are cars just, again, moving down the street. So if you're going to go ahead and look for more tracking points that are attached to moving cars throughout the scene, there's some stationary cars that it's locked to, but not really anyone's. So go ahead and hit go again. And it's going to go ahead and optimize that. And you can see it's much better. You can see we've still got an error of over 3. But take a look at the camera. You can actually see that there's some things that are looking correct height-wise and so forth. You can see there's actually some 3D depth in the scene and so forth. But now what we can do is go in and make this scene look even better. And we're going to change, instead of sort alphabetic, we're going to go ahead and change to sort by error. And what that's going to do is it's going to have the worst trackers first. So if we hit the down key, you automatically have selected the worst track in the scene. And you can see where it is here in the scene, and that's the worst one in the scene. So we'll delete that one. We'll hit the down arrow again, and we're just going to go through each of these and kind of talk about why it is, and that one's not a good one. And we're just going to go through the process of doing that as you scroll through. It could be attached to a car, maybe a person moving in the scene or something like that, or just maybe an object that's hard to track in the scene. Now, when you're doing this, it's generally a good idea to go ahead and select just a few of the worst ones in the scene. You don't want to remove all of the worst trackers in the scene, because some of them errors get taken okay, or maybe some of the other ones that were in there that were moving were taking care of it already. So we'll change this to refine and click go, and we'll refine the error here, or refine the track, or solve, excuse me. And now you can see actually the error is already now below 1. It took a significant amount of it off, but our goal is to try and make this even better. So we're going to go ahead and just kind of scout some more tracking marks You can kind of actually see as you're scrolling through, you can kind of see some of the tracking marks are shifting somewhat, and that gives us a good visual clue of what we need to delete. So you can see that one's deleted a little bit. And again, these little points that we're seeing, kind of hard to see what they exactly are. I suppose they could actually, that one actually looks like it's a person kind of moving around in the plaza or something like that. So it's actually tracking it effectively, but that point is actually moving on the scene. Go ahead and see if we have any other ones here. Again, the idea is to not have it obviously be tracking moving objects, because that's going to be the one that's definitely going to throw things off. That's definitely another person moving around in the plaza. You can see there's a whole group of people. There's another one as well. Let's go ahead and see if we zoom anything out, but let's go ahead and press go again to refine track even more. And there our value dropped even further to 0.59 or so. So we're starting to get good. The next step of what we want to do is go ahead and add some manual trackers to the scene, because what we're going to do is put these trackers in a position that we'd like to have and reference them later, and that'll become more clear as we get here later in this class. So we'll go ahead here and take a look at the top of the building here. You can see that there are quite a few points that probably pretty easy to track here on the scene. You can see there's some colored objects, some really good white right angles, some air conditioning units on the screen. So we can do it manually, of course, but we can turn on the peel button like we did last time. But just in looking at this, you could select various points here, but they're really kind of hard to distinguish what the point is that we'd be selecting them. So that's going to be kind of complicated. So what we're going to want to do is go ahead and add some manual trackers similar to what we did last week with the scene by the lake. So go ahead and add a point here. These little yellow boxes are really good. These tracking points will show up by green by default. And so we'll just go ahead and really quickly pick several more points that feel are going to be good to track. And again, we know these are also, since they're kind of the same object on the top of the roof, these should also kind of be residing within the same plane as well. So we'll just go ahead and do those. Now these are all set up for going forward by default. So go ahead and play through them. Get to the end of the scene. And now we're out of the scene, or the trackers are all off the scene. And so now what we're going to do is follow the same kind of process here. Go back to this and go ahead and turn that off and go ahead and lock it. And then we're going to do the same process for the other trackers in our scene. We've got this one, so we'll go ahead and disable that, lock it. Go ahead and go forward here and select it and lock it as well. And then we're going to go ahead and select this one and lock it. And same thing here, we'll go ahead and turn this off and lock it as well. And so now we've picked all these points that are in a location that we know. So now we've got those all set up on the top of the building on the same plane effectively. Now what we want to do is find some points on the ground to further help us align the ground plane with our tracking. So go ahead and find a point that's visible. So add a point here at this intersection. No pun intended. And then we'll go ahead and play through that until it gets ready to move off the screen or disappear. And then we'll go ahead and now off and lock that. And now we're going to go ahead and find another point that we want to add, something that's visible for a long time and visible in a place that's not close to that other point. And again, it's just some trial and error a little bit. So what we'll do is go ahead and place an object here. Turn that off by accident. Okay, select that point, set it there. And for this one, you'll see why I'm going to change the color to red. And then we'll go ahead and hit play. Actually on the last frame, so we'll need to go backwards. So we'll do that. And then get back here. And set a key now to redefine that point. Keep going. And then go back here. Now we're going to want to go ahead and do forward and turn that off. Actually, there, off, turn that back forward, and then lock that. And now go forward. Take a look at how that looks. So as you can see, that one's actually wobbling and shaking a bit. So after all that, we're going to go ahead and delete it and not keep it. So now we're going to add a few more tracking points to the ground, because what that will do is allow us to accurately place objects and set up the ground plane future. So go ahead and add one there. Go ahead and play through. Wait until it goes bad, which is about there. And then go ahead and turn it off and lock it. And then look around for another tracking point to add. And again, pick some that are kind of giving us a good location or distance and so forth from each other. And the idea is you just want to go ahead and scan through the shot visually and maybe pick on things that you would like to see or you think that are going to be easy to track. Actually, we're going to go ahead and track up here on this building. It's going to select that corner, and again, that would be a good position item, you know, that's at a certain height and so forth. So go ahead and track that, and then go ahead and off and lock it. Now, it's a little bit different from Victor's used to doing in PF Track and other applications where you have to play and lock and disable and so forth, but actually finds it really well and fast and easy to use, especially once you get used to using it. And if you take a look at this track, you can kind of see that it's got a few problems. You can see that it shifts right there, shifts from that little T to there. So go to this last good frame, unlock it, add a key now. That will once again update the reference point, and go ahead and step forward. And you can see it locks there, probably because it's rotating. Go there, key it, and then go here maybe and take a look at it. It's actually not looking like a great track when you're doing this, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that. Just kind of, again, looking for areas that you think provide some high contrast and some areas to match to, and maybe there's this little T here would work. Make that a little bit smaller to match, and let's try that one out. Make sure we're tracking forward here, and go ahead, and it's kind of drifting there as well. That's not working. Actually, it doesn't work any better than the previous one that we had. So you've got all the cars in the scene that are moving that you can't use for points. Maybe some of them by the side, but just look around for some other points maybe. Just scanning the scene. Maybe that point here at the end of the crosswalk will work a little bit better. And that's holding until it's holding a little longer, but it does drift. Just try the key. Go forward. And that's still not looking very good either. So again, some of it's trial and error when you're using these manual trackers. You think about it, it's using auto tracking, and you're just trying to improve that by doing it manually. So we've got those new trackers there, so we'll go ahead and refine that by hitting go. Click OK. And now you can see our new points that we've added there. You can see the extra points that we've added. They'll help us in positioning things within the scene. And just make sure that it's looking okay. And you can see that that point is looking okay. And that point is looking okay as well. It's always a good idea to go in and visually inspect it after you do the refine and so forth. But we're going to go ahead and add another point here. Just one more point that we want to position, and we're going to do it. Turn that on. Select that. So it's a good position, and we're going to go backwards. Unlock it, go back forward. And now we've got a track there to the end of the scene, and go to refine it. So let's go ahead and start aligning the camera to our environment in the way we want it. Right now it's just kind of moving around in kind of a nonsensical way, because obviously if we take a look at our camera here, it should be up there looking down on the points. So we'll go ahead and switch here on the orientation tab. Go ahead and click the number 3 button. And the first point that we want to do is select our origin. Again, we're going to select 3 points. And in order to more accurately see this, what we're going to do is go ahead and switch over to constrained points, which gives you a view of the points that you've selected and how you have them defined. So you can see that we have tracker number 28 is locked to XYZ axes with a position of 0, 0, 0. And that is, of course, the origin. Now, the next thing we want to do is we're going to define a second point, or click on a second point, and that's going to be on the same plane as the original point. And then it's going to actually define the x-axis. So the x-axis will be drawn between the origin and to our new point over here. And then we can easily see that over here in the constrained points view. You can see that we've added tracker 15. You can see it's XYZ there. And its X value is set to 20, Y of 0, and Z is 0. And 20 is the default setup, and you can go ahead and change that if you need to. But again, you can see that sharing the same Z and the Y. And then the next point you want to do is a third point, and you want it to be on the same plane as the original 2 points, but you want to make sure it's not through this x-axis. So you want to make sure it's on the same plane and cannot be on the x-axis. That's important to consider. So go ahead and select this point. And then you can see over here in the constrained points view that you can see that it's defining on the z-axis, and you can see that that the z value is actually 0, and so we'll say yes. And then go ahead and click OK. And now you can see that it moved the shot here in our view. If we go ahead and go in the left view, you can see now that the camera is now accurately looking down at the points. And we'll go ahead and switch here to the perspective view and lock the perspective view to the current camera. And then you can see that it has defined things correctly. The ground plane's not quite the way we want it, but you can see that in general terms it's correct. You can see that the smaller cones are further away from our cameras versus those ones that are up here on top of the building. They're much smaller. So you know that we've got things kind of set up the way they are, and the 0, 0 point is right there. You can see that's the interaction. So again, we've done a pretty good start at getting our ground plane defined and oriented the way we want. But again, we're going to want to make this a little better. So what we've done is we've imported some objects, or brought in some objects, just like what we did with the people in the first class, and kind of just brought in some rough objects just to kind of see how things look. It's a good way to just see what you're thinking about your track. And if we go ahead and switch to the view, what we're going to do is we're going to want to define, to get a more accurate definition of the ground plane, we want to go ahead and select more points. So we'll select this point, which we tracked manually earlier, and that's why we did it. You can see we knew that was definitely on the ground. What we want to do is go back here to our system and go ahead and select down here that it's going to be on, this point is on the XY plane. So again, you can see that it went ahead and set that Z value at 0. And so we're going to go ahead and do the same thing here on the XY plane. You can see there Z is 0. And then just look around to see if you have any more points that you can do, because the more points, it will generally help. And again, in this case, we picked some points there later in the scene that are quite a bit further away than our original 3 points, which should help the solve a little bit as well, as long as the tracks are accurate and so forth. And you can see there's a little bit of error there, and we'll go back to solve though and hit go. We've got that set to refine. And you can see that in the constraint points view, the errors went down, which hopefully will mean we have a better view. And sure enough, we switch to the left view, and you can see that we have a much better alignment, more points that seem to be visible along the ground. much more so than we did. There were fewer that are kind of angled, if you remember from before. And if you look at the objects, they look actually a little better now on our scene as we're scrolling through the scene. There's actually much less drift actually in the scene as well. And take a look at these error values up here. Don't worry or get too obsessed about these values. You can see they're going to have some error on these points on the screen. The tracking points aren't always going to be perfect all the time. You can see here they've got 0.6. Remember, that value was up about 15 when we first started fixing things on this scene. So there's always going to be a little bit of error. I guess the thing is you need to be just aware of things that look a little bit out of whack, but these are kind of within the tolerance of what you might expect when you're taking a look at the scene, and would consider this pretty normal. Well, to finish this a little bit more, we're going to orientate the perspective view again. We're locked to the camera. You can see that the grid of our world coordinate system isn't really aligned to the grid on the streets and so forth. And so what we're going to do is want to correct for that a little bit. So we're going to kind of want to rotate things around in our view. So let's go ahead and go to the 3D panel. Let's go ahead and select the camera and lock the camera because we don't want to move the camera. Okay, we're going to move other things, just not the camera. And we're going to click whole. And now when you have that selected, what you can do is you can go ahead and move all the points around. And so there you can see that we're moving everything. What we're going to do is rotate. And so now that's everything that we want to do, but we're not moving the object. So in order to do that, what we need to do before we move anything, 3D, we want whole affecting the meshes being the 3D objects in the scene. And so now as we rotate the grid of our world coordinate system to the grid of the streets, which is kind of nice. Now it's not going to be exactly perfect. The streets aren't exactly parallel, but you have something that's obviously much better than what we started out with it rotated around. And if we move these around in X and Y, you're going to see that it's going to move along the ground plane and move correctly. So the very last thing that we're going to close out with this class in this week is take a look at something that we haven't looked at yet in the Synthesize course. We're going to take a look at the graph editor. And then you can see you've got all the trackers, but we're not interested in those for now. We're going to take a look and just talk about the camera a little bit and how you can take a look, visualize what's going on with the track. We'll go ahead and switch that. And we're going to hide some other items as well. And so what we're going to want to do is just select X, Y, and Z and take a look at the graph here of what we have based upon the camera motion. And we'll talk about this more in upcoming classes as well. And we'll talk about how we can use this and understand it a little bit better. But in general, what we're looking at, you can see that there are a lot of little spikes and some little bit of jitter. The little jitter is really not so much to worry about. This big spike here in the middle is maybe something to worry about. Of course, it could be something related to the camera, and of course we can fix that as well. But if you take a look at the camera, excuse me, let's go ahead and look at the quad view with the camera path. I'll go ahead and zoom into this. You can see that actually the path of the camera is actually pretty smooth in general. But again, the only flag that we're looking at in the graph editor is something to be aware of is that middle item. So maybe you'll see something when you're taking a look at the scene that causes you to want to adjust that and track it and isolate in on problems within the scene. And again, it could just be a bump in the camera, for instance. But that's it for this course. For Victor, I'm John Montgomery. Thanks for watching. Be sure to drop by the forums, and if you have any questions, be sure to post them. Victor and I are hanging out a ton in the forums, and I hope you're enjoying learning Synthesize as much as I am. We'll see you in the forums.